Here are my 30 best tips for saving money while traveling the world on a budget. Number one, get your passport early. This helps you avoid a $60 expedition fee, as well as a quick return service for almost $20. That means you save $80 by getting your passport early. And that means at least 3 months before your planned travel dates. Tip number two, make sure you're using credit cards and debit cards that have zero foreign transaction fees. I use my local bank for debit and cash withdrawals, but I use the Amazon Prime Visa card for any credit card purchases. It's got no foreign transaction fee, and I also get a percentage back on every purchase. And that leads me to tip number three, which is to make sure that you clear your cards for travel before you take off. Trust me, you don't want to lose your debit card inside of an ATM that thinks that maybe someone's trying to rob you because you didn't clear it for travel. So make sure you either call your bank or log into the app, whatever you need to do to make sure that it's cleared for foreign travel. And tip number four is that you can actually avoid a lot of ATM fees by just sending yourself cash. That could be through something that's more familiar to you, like Western Union. But then I've also used apps like Zoom and Remitly to send myself money around the world, and then you can just pick up that cash in places that are really easy to find, like a convenience store. But another really important way that you can save money by traveling the world is by packing less. This saves you money by allowing you to rent smaller taxis when you need them. You don't need a van, you can just rent a car. It also allows you to save time when packing less. And you're also going to be able to save on airfare. And that brings me to tip number six, which is do not pack any check-in luggage. And this saves you money in three ways. Number one, you don't have to buy the big check-in bags. Number two, every time you do check in a bag, it costs you extra, and you could have gotten a lower price if you'd not checked in a bag. And number three is by maintaining all the lost time that would have been gone if you'd had gone and waited for your bags at baggage pickup. And that's because you followed the next tip, number seven, which is only use carry-on luggage. Now make sure to check your airline's policy, but generally you get one carry-on bag and one personal item. For the carry-on bag, that can be actually a decent sized suitcase, but make sure you check the weight limits on that and pack that really lightly. And for the backpack, you're going to want to get as big as a backpack as possible and fill it with all the heavy things and as much as you can, but you still want to have like some cinches or something on the side so then it can squeeze underneath the seat in front of you. And the reason I put the heavy things into that bag is because generally speaking, when I go to check in with just carry-on only, the airlines will only check my wheeled suitcase luggage. So that's going to be really light. And then I just carry on my personal item, which is my backpack over my shoulders. And that's because generally speaking, your carry-on is going up above you in the flight and they don't want anything heavy going up in there. Now this brings me to tip number eight, which is when you land for the first time, try to avoid the currency conversion counters within the airport as well as the SIM card sales. If you try to change your currency within the airport, that's about the worst rate that you can get in the rest of the country, trust me. Same thing for the SIM cards. You can see the plans in there almost tripled in price many times because they know they're getting the people right off the plane that really need it right then. They can upcharge you. Now, if you do need to get a little bit of cash, that leads us to tip number nine. Changing the right amount of cash, in my mind, if you have to change at the airport, means getting just enough to get yourself to your destination and then maybe a day's worth of food and expenses. Because within that day, you can go and find a better currency conversion center that'll give you a better rate. Likewise, for tip number 10, if you absolutely find yourself needing a SIM card in the airport, then make sure that you just get a short-term plan because you can always go outside the airport later and extend it for much cheaper. And you can help yourself in that regard by following tip number 11, which is research the best way to get from the airport to your destination. Is there a bus or a train? Is there a mini shared bus? Is there a taxi? If there is a taxi, is it better to use a preset price or is it better to use the meter? Also, if you're staying in a hotel for the first night, be sure to check with them to see if they have a free hotel transfer for you. But then once you're at your destination and you can finally set down your bags, that's when you want to go hunting for the currency conversion centers. Some are visible on Google Maps, others are not, and you just have to walk around and find them. Make sure you look up on their boards. They often have the exchange rates up there, and also double check to make sure that they don't have any transaction fees. Now, if you are going to change currency, make sure you follow tip number 13, which is don't change out your small bills. In this case, as I'm American, I wouldn't change out any ones or fives. Generally, I try not to change out 10s or 20s either, just because the smaller the bill, the worse conversion rate you're going to get. And that brings me to tip number 14, which is make sure you have large denomination currencies. In my case, I would have 50s and 100s if I want to change anything out because you get a really good rate on those. And thankfully, I find myself really hard to get stuck if I don't have money because there are lots of money-saving apps that you can use while traveling the world. You've probably heard of Uber, but did you know it's actually much cheaper in other countries? But it also has a lot of competitors too, like Grab, Beat, Didi, Bolt. There's a lot of apps like this, so make sure you check in the country that you're in to see who its competitors are and sign up with them. And also, I always find myself using Google Translate and iTranslate, both to translate the spoken word if I don't know how to say something, and to use it so I can take a picture of any local restaurant's menu, I can instantly flip it into English, and then I can eat for a better price, because then I can eat at the more local places. Also, to save money on communication with people, I use a lot of apps internationally, and a lot of people use these like WhatsApp, WeChat, Line. They really use these to connect with other people. I also use Text Now, which is only $5 a year. That gives me an American phone number that anyone can call in the entire world. But I also use an American number via Google Voice as well. And lastly, always try to make sure if there are any local apps that maybe you didn't know about. Now, tip number 16, and a great way to save money every month, is by getting a good deal on long-term accommodation. So staying for a week, you're generally not going to get that good of a deal, but if you're staying for a month or longer, you can generally bring the price down on a lot of accommodations around the world. So the longer the stay, the more money you save. And so for tip number 17, I would tell you to make sure that you're searching for places to rent by doing the actual footwork. That means looking for rental signs on the streets and giving them a call. It means taking a look inside different condo complexes, taking a look at them and looking up on the balcony, see if anyone has any for rent signs. And it's also a good idea to learn the local word for rent, because that's the word that will be on the rent signs. Tip number 18, again, still finding accommodation, is ask everybody you meet on the street. Generally, people you meet, especially in smaller communities, if you ask them, hey, do you have anything for rent, or do you know somebody that has something for rent, they can pretty much find you somebody. If you're not so comfortable talking to people in person, then why not use tip number 19, which is to utilize Facebook Marketplace and the local Facebook groups. Facebook Marketplace will often have many places to rent, but if you look inside of the local Facebook groups, you can search something like the destination you're going to, places to rent, or rentals available, and you'll often find a group that accommodates that. But don't forget tip number 20, which is actually a good idea for a longer term approach, which is at first just stay in a few short-term rentals and see which one you like the most. That way you have kind of a feel maybe for a week or two of what it's actually like there before you sign on something more long-term. And for tip number 21, I would tell you to make sure that you're searching for rentals at the right time. For example, I'm in Phuket right now, and if you were trying to find some place to rent in December when it's high peak tourist season, it's going to be really hard to find some place, and it could even be triple in price than what you might find the exact same place in July when a lot of people leave the island. So try to find your accommodation during low season, and then that way you can get a much better deal on it. Other than your accommodation, food is often a large part of the budget. So that's why for tip number 22, I say you should eat like a local and avoid places that are Western comforts like McDonald's, KFC, Subway, Pizza Hut. These things are all over the world. Which brings me to tip number 23, which is eat at the places where you see the locals eating at. If you're out looking for a place to eat and you see a place just packed full of locals, then stop and eat there. It's usually a good choice. If you're not going out to eat, but you're gonna cook at home, then make sure you shop around different grocery markets. There are supermarkets everywhere, so you may be able to find pretty much anything you need, but they generally have higher prices on stuff. And that's compared to the smaller grocers, who are generally less expensive, but may not have everything that you will recognize. But if you're looking for a lot of variety and you still want a really good value, then make sure you check out local night markets, weekend markets. Sometimes there's day markets. Hit up those. That's where you get the really fresh food, a lot of variety, and you get it at a good price. And that leads me into tip number 25, which is to explore the street food near you. I guarantee you, if you've traveled some of the places like I've traveled, like Egypt, Thailand, Colombia, you're gonna run into food that you have no idea what it is. That's why you just gotta dive in, try it out, and see if you would eat it again in the future. And that leads me into tip number 6, which is be prepared for something called Bangkok belly, Montezuma's revenge, in layman's terms, diarrhea and vomiting from ingesting something unkind. And it could be so bad that you might have to go to the doctors and get rehydrated. Oftentimes doctors will require a cash payment, so save yourself some money by making sure that what you're eating is well cooked and that you're only drinking bottled water in places where it's not already treated. And that brings me to tip number 7, which is if you still want to eat really cheaply in a lot of places, then make sure you check out the convenience stores and gas stations. This particularly comes to mind in Japan and Thailand, where you can easily get these really cool microwavable meals for $1 or $2, and you get to microwave them in store and they give you a fork and everything. It's just a meal ready to go for really cheap. And so for tip 28, when you're shopping for things around the home, make sure you go with the local brands. Just as an example, I was looking for shampoo the other day, and I generally get Pantene's anti-dandruff shampoo, but when I went to the store, I saw a knockoff comparison to it that is the local Thai brand, and it was about 1/3 of the price, so I just grabbed that. And tip number 29 is still living like a local. In this case, living like a local in regards to transportation. Some places are very walkable, and that's free. You could rent a pedal bike for an extended amount of time in many places, and that's really cheap. If you're in a bigger city, maybe they have a monthly bus or train pass that you can get your hands on. You can rent a motorcycle in many places. Right now I'm renting one for $100 a month. There's even Grab a Bike where you can rent somebody who drives you around on a motorcycle. Really, really inexpensive. And my last tip, probably the most difficult, is learn the local language. Even if you can just learn a few simple phrases, it goes a long way with a lot of folks. And if you can learn it fluently, it can actually save you money in the long run when negotiating deals on things. So if you want to travel full time or move out of your home country, then make sure you check out this video right here and subscribe right here.